Baked Bros presents the Know Your Dose podcast. Join hosts Thomas Rimbach, Nadeem Alhassan, and Derek Espinosa as they turn the soil on the cannabis industry. With over 20 years of combined industry experience, these three experts will deliver your dose of cannabis, psychedelics, and personal development. Follow on their journey as they aim to destigmatize cannabis, combat the abuse of pharmaceuticals, and implement their altruistic approach into the budding cannabis industry.
So, with this episode, the three major things we're going to cover is what's the history behind cannabis and film? What are the best cannabis movies of all time? And how have the media's portrayal of cannabis helped and hurt our community? So, that's an interesting topic. Let's start with that. How has the media's portrayal of cannabis helped and hurt our community? Because that would begin with Reefer Madness.
Yeah, so I mean, I think
you guys have seen that, right?
Yeah,
I've
we've
seen
Reefer Madness.
Okay, just making sure.
Well, I mean, actually, have I seen it through? No, because it's absolutely ridiculous of a movie to watch. And if you're watching it, it's hard to watch. But do I get the concept and the idealistic things that they were trying to portray? Absolutely.
Thomas, do you remember we actually went to a play at the ASU Gammage of Reefer Madness, and it was hilarious.
That was cool.
It was really cool.
Different. Yeah, that was
really
way cool.
Sorry, go ahead, Derek.
No, I was just going to say, so, film has been, at least in this country, a way to, you can follow trends in popular culture through film, right? And so this was really the first film ever made to highlight cannabis. And obviously in the 20th century, it was seen as something that was super, super negative. And one of the things that I didn't know when I was looking into this was there was this thing called the production code, and this was the film industry's standards, basically, at the time. And one of the things that they did was they wanted to censor questionable content. And so drug use was one of those things. And so this film was kind of made like outside the lines of that. And it was actually called Tell Your Children First. And then it got repurposed as a propaganda film and called Reefer Madness. And so it's just interesting how this was kind of the gold standards in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. This was the only thing the American public would have been exposed to in terms of what cannabis looked like. And so you think about the damage that does to the collective consciousness when you're seeing these sex maniacs and violent criminals, and they're calling it the real public enemy number one, and saying that it causes smokers to be aggressive with sexual rages.
Rapists.
Yeah, exactly.
It demonized marijuana, the marijuana menace. Sorry.
Right. And so no, you're right on the money, man. And so many of the people who grew up during that time, this was their only exposure. So it's an interesting historical piece because it's no wonder people have these narratives inside their head, right? You're reading the newspapers, which are saying this, and then you see this film, which is used as drug education, and people are like, yeah, like we don't want our kids doing that. And so, and again, the film industry doesn't let anything else come out. And so it's not until the 1960s, specifically 1969, that you see anything different, which was the movie Easy Rider. Have either one of you seen that movie?
No. I have not seen Easy Rider.
So I haven't either. The clips I've seen on the internet look incredibly boring, but that's just a personal thing. But one of the things interesting is the guy who's played by Jack Nicholson. He's being encouraged to smoke pot by Peter Fonda, who's like the motorcycle guy. And he goes, hey, man, I can't afford to get hooked. This leads to harder stuff. Gateway theory, right?
Sure.
So it's interesting how the media's portrayal during, from starting in 1930 to the end of 1969 is pretty much consistent, which is this stuff is bad. It's going to get you hooked onto worse drugs. You're going to be a violent criminal. All this craziness that we're frankly still dealing with today.
Yeah, do they? I think. Go ahead, Thomas.
I was just going to say it's important to know that it still happens today, right? Maybe it's not cannabis being portrayed. I mean, it actually is kind of in a way. It's been portrayed a little differently, more like we're stupid as opposed to rapists, right? But even
Mhm.
in
You're
other
so lazy.
situations, yeah. But other situations, the media portrays that as well, right? It's still today, so you got to watch out what you watch, I guess, right?
No,
Ooh, yeah, watch what
absolutely.
you watch.
I mean, we've seen this happen over
It
and
sounds
over.
so
As
smart.
Stoner. That's great. Yeah, dude. And wasn't Reefer Madness? It was. I mean, you said like these, these crazy, sex fiends and menaces, but wasn't it like targeted towards like Mexicans, like making it look bad? Like they tied it into them, basically saying like this comes as a Mexican weed and blah 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 blah. That's where the word marijuana really got introduced.
Yeah, so that's a interesting piece that happened before this, and I don't know if they showed this in Reefer Madness, but the narrative around that time was, well, essentially you have hemp being grown in the U.S. and it's a vital crop and commodity. The big difference happened when you started to have Mexican immigrants coming to the U.S. to work, and they were smoking cannabis. After the end of a workday, they would kick back and roll up some cannabis and smoke it. Then there's this big push to basically squash immigrants from coming in. And at the same time, cannabis kind of took off with jazz musicians. So this is where it started to make its way into Black communities as well. And at the time, you have someone by the name of Harry Anslinger. But are either one of you familiar with him?
Yeah.
So Harry Anslinger was the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics at the time, and their department was specifically targeting alcohol during alcohol prohibition. So they're the ones fighting the mob, trying to contain this whole alcohol situation. The U.S. basically decides this is a terrible idea. Making alcohol illegal is never going to work. So we're going to bring it back. Well, this puts the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in an interesting situation where now they have no reason to have jobs. So Harry Anslinger, who's the head of this department, decides we need to figure out something else to criminalize. So they pick heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. And this is where you start to see him partnering with different groups like newspaper outlets, the media, to create a bunch of buzz around this term marijuana, which nobody has any idea what that is because they're all used to calling it hemp. And they associate it with jazz musicians and Mexican immigrants and start writing these sensationalized stories about it causing people to be extremely violent. And so that's where that whole narrative came from. And when you go back and you actually read some of the quotes from Harry Anslinger, it was deeply embedded within a racist framework. He did not like blacks. He did not like Mexicans. He hated jazz music in general. And so it was really his war on these communities and this drug specifically that kind of ignited all of this stuff. And it just, once that permeated into the culture, it stuck because it was a narrative that was easy to get behind. Like nobody wants their kid to turn into a rapist or criminal and be associated with, those types of things.
Dude, you know what? There's a really it was a really cool show on Netflix called Grass is Greener. Did you ever see that?
Grass is greener.
Grass
Was
is
it a
Greener.
documentary?
It was, and it was
Yes.
about connecting cannabis to the jazz culture and how that kind of went down. And it was really it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean jazz musicians and they felt like cannabis slowed down the music and helped them with improvisation, which is huge in jazz. I mean, if you listen to like good jazz artists or a good jazz concert, it's all about riffing off of somebody else, right? And I mean, cannabis absolutely does slow things down. It helps with creativity. So yeah, it definitely. And then I mean, you look at rock and roll. I mean, rock and roll has a lot of its roots in jazz and blues. So cannabis really has helped fueled the music culture. I mean, hip hop, same thing. Just super interesting. So, yeah.
What about Fritz the Cat? That was a cartoon. Why'd they go with the cartoon?
Holy cow. So you should definitely, if you're listening to this, look up Fritz the Cat because you will be shocked. I on Friday at the end of the workday, I pulled it up and just the YouTube trailer, and I had to turn it off. I was like, if someone walked in and saw me watching this, they would be deeply disturbed. It's so gross. It's so ridiculous.
We're not rated X for nothing, baby.
Yeah,
is the first thing that pops up.
Yeah. So, but it was kind of, again, one of these pieces that showed cannabis in a negative light in terms of counterculture and overly sexualized, and it was based on this comic named Robert Crumb, who has a weird history as well. But it was one of the first pieces that was kind of like an underground film that portrayed cannabis and made it popular. The next biggest one, go ahead.
Nope, I was going to ask you, like, because the first couple we've been talking about were like really demonizing cannabis, but then where was the switch where now it's not so much demonized, but now you're just a stoner, like that culture? Where did that come about?
That actually came about from Cheech and Chong. So what's interesting is Cheech and Chong, and I didn't know this, but they had comedy albums long before they ever had the movie. And so these comedy albums became super popular. And so let's see, what was the date? 1978. So it wasn't until 1978 when Up in Smoke comes out that you have the first big stoner movie, iconic stoner movie. And this is where you start to get the dopey tie-dye, long hair, and, hippie kind of stereotypes. And what's really interesting is one of the things that they did, and this is Tommy Chong's character, right? He's the hippie, is they show he comes from this rich, like, white family. And so that's like one of the first scenes you see of Tommy Chong is he's making a smoothie and his dad's like, get a fucking job. And he's like, no, man, I'm just going to make my smoothies. And so they were really kind of like just riffing off of what actually was happening in the culture. And so they make this first movie and it just takes off. Like it goes crazy. And that's, again, one of those movies that really portrayed that stoner stereotype that has, at least in my mind, after Reefer Madness, people who grew up with Cheech and Chong, that's the version. They're not looking at us as rapists and criminals most of the time. They're looking at us as Tommy Chong stoner, or Cheech Marine.
Totally stoner dum-dums, like just goofy hippie, coast of California. Like that's I think that you make a good point there. Hey, any of you got a joint?
Because it'd be cooler if you did.
Hey, now we're getting into some of the best movies out there. So Dazed and Confused.
Oh man, right? But I got Tide sticks, man.
Dude, we could quote them all day. Tide sticks.
So this is a funny thing is, and again, it follows with the what was going on politically at the time. But in the 1980s, outside of Cheech and Chong's, next movie, there really isn't anything you can point to during the 1980s that was a quote unquote stoner film. And this was during the Reagan administration. This is during the Just Say No campaign. And so you don't see cannabis in film during that time, at least in any overt way. You have things like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Have you guys seen that?
No. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say you could look at it as a stoner movie because they act like stoners, but you never see cannabis make its way into the film. Mm-hmm. And so it was really like the whole country was like, hey, we're not about this right now. And so what you're saying is the Dazed and Confused, that happened in 1993, which is when the film industry started to look back on the 1970s with some nostalgia, because they'd had enough distance between that time period. And so they made Dazed and Confused. Yeah.
Made it a lot cooler. And that was, I don't know, that was pretty cool. I don't know if it was just because it was like the whole high school thing, like graduation, hazing type stuff. But it kind of seemed like it would have been pretty cool to like been a part of that movie, or at least live like that. Made it look like it'd be cool to live it during that time.
Well, and I mean, at least for me, that's when my parents grew up. And the stories that they tell are very reminiscent of what those people what they portrayed in that film, this was something that a lot of American teenagers were doing. I mean, lots of people, the 70s historically were a time where cannabis was at all-time high, right? Like you have the Summer of Love, which is 1969, and then the 70s happened. And so this is really this like window where cannabis was in our culture in a big way, and then the 80s come down and totally shut the whole ship down. And so the 90s is just a reflection on that time period.
Well, dude, what are some other movies? I could list a few, but go ahead, because there's a bunch of them, dude.
Well, have either one of you seen Jay and Silent Bob?
$15, little man. Put that shit in my hand. If you don't, then you owe me, yo.
Mm.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I could tell. So
Uh,
this was the first this was like a new wave of stoner comedy where they get away from the traditional classic like surfer bro stereotype. And you get something that's more stoic drug dealer and observant street philosopher is kind of how they're described. Um
I've
yeah.
never heard it called that. That's interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's just another portrayal, right? And then like it seems funny now because we think, at least in my mind, I always think of stoners as this like philosophical character who has like way more knowledge than you would ever expect. But that's where that stereotype came from. So really the 90s was like kind of reshaping what it was to be a stoner. And also in the 90s is when you have the first wave of black stoner comedy.
Uh-huh.
So Ice Cube, after Boys in the Hood, comes out with Friday, which
Totally.
I didn't know he actually wrote and starred in. So I knew
Yeah,
he was in
man.
it, but he wrote it.
Yeah.
Talented guy.
Very. And then you also have Dave Chappelle, who wrote and starred in Half Baked. And I think he was like 24.
That's awesome, man. Because that movie is absolutely a classic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorites.
Definitely.
And so again, the 90s was just this super weird time for stoner movies, and a important time because all these different styles of stoner comedies came out. You also had How High starring Method Man and Redman, which I've never seen.
You got High School with Wiz Khalifa and Snoop Dogg. That was a good one.
Mm-hmm. So now we're getting to the 2000s where most of the ones that I've seen happen. So you have what's it called, Pineapple Express during this time.
Act Up.
Grandma's Boy.
Grandma's Boy.
Pause. If anybody listening to the podcast hasn't seen Grandma's Boy and you smoke weed, seriously, watch it, guys.
Sounds like I have some homework.
God, Derek.
Adios, turd nuggets.
Guys, you gotta watch that one. Like, if you get anything from this podcast, that's what you should watch. But
I'll report back.
It's an Adam Sandler movie. He's not in it, but
and so that's what it's the Happy Madison film production or whatever. Like, that whole crew. There's oftentimes cannabis or weed in their movies. What was it? Was it 50 First Dates? Your favorite saying, Thomas?
No, hot chick.
Hot chick.
Yeah.
Not many people know this, but you can put your weed in here. Like they're so subtle. But that whole crew, and then you've got like what's his name, Jonah Hill, and
oh
Super Bad.
Super Bad.
Yes,
oh my
Superbad.
gosh.
Totally, bro.
Yeah, there was this wave. I mean, the 2000s were an incredible time for this kind of stuff. And what's interesting is they kind of like you said, like the Adam Sandler movie, like, hey man, you could put your weed in here. This was something that wasn't socially acceptable. And so for some of those are more mainstream comedies, right? And so it's interesting that it was still making its way in as opposed to something like Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, where the whole plot is around weed.
Right.
Yeah.
I could never see how people I couldn't watch that one. It was so slow. But then there's other people like my best friends that are just love it.
Dude, they made 3 of them, man. The first one was really, really funny. I really thought it was Go to White Castle. The rest were kind of like spoofs. But yeah, those God, dude, I think we just named Super Troopers.
Yep.
Oh, classic.
Snosberry tastes like snosberry. Yeah, dude. What else?
Well, did you guys ever see Super High Me Super High Me?
Wasn't that a documentary though?
Yeah,
yes.
That was the playoff of the Super Size Me.
Exactly.
Yeah, with,
so
Benson.
Right. So that was one of the first portrayals of trying to argue against the notion that there was long-term side effects associated with cannabis. And I remember watching that in my parents' house on Netflix going like, holy shit, this is so crazy. He did 30 days off weed and then 30 days on. This is so cool. Now I'd probably watch it and be like, this is so ridiculous. This is not real.
Yeah. You look at Doug Benson and you're just kind of like, wait a minute, did you start with this or did you was it the weed?
Totally. Totally.
He had a high idea while he was smoking weed to make a documentary on smoking weed.
That made him.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, for sure.
We sponsored one of his shows, or we had a setup there at a couple of them.
Yeah, and down in Tucson.
Yeah, and then he came up here too, and did a couple shout outs. Funny guy.
Cat Williams, though.
Oh my
man,
God.
Representing cannabis. Damn.
Oh my God,
for
dude.
sure. Well, so that's a great point, man. Is stoner comedians specifically?
Oh yeah. Quite a few of those too. Well, I mean, okay, we named a lot. We said Grandma's Boy is the one to go. That's obviously, biased opinion on my behalf, but if you had to say what the all-time favorite or best is, what's it going to be?
Real quick, let me close the loop on this history thing and get you to the present day, and then we'll answer that question. So the last thing is, in the last few years, you haven't really seen a big stoner comedy in the sense of the character or the whole plot was based on cannabis. And a lot of people think that that's because cannabis has permeated into our culture so much that it's now no longer this niche. It's just something that is associated with a lot of people's everyday life. And so now what you're seeing in movies and in TV shows is weed is not, or cannabis is not central to a character. It's just something that people do. And I mean, they give some examples in terms of shows that are out there like Atlanta or Broad City. But I mean, most of the shows I've been watching recently show cannabis use, but it's not, I mean, it's just like you would see. It's just like an everyday part of life. It doesn't say anything about the character whatsoever.
I mean, it's even gotten to the point to where, I mean, they have cannabis cooking shows on Netflix. I think there's 2 of them, and they're pretty cool, man. They're full blown cannabis cooking shows. They're making like Michelin star like type food, dude, and it's actually really cool to see.
So yeah, the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. I mean, this isn't. It's no longer something that's like a wow factor. So there's no wow factor for having cannabis in a movie anymore.
Fritz the cat's out of the bag.
So what? So back to your original. What's your favorite and why?
Dude, well, I mean, kind of how I passionately said earlier in the episode, Grandma's Boy for sure.
Yeah, I second that.
So what is it specifically about Grandma? Because you guys have been going on and on about Grandma's Boy for a long time. But what is it specifically about that movie that you love?
Oh, man, it's just not embellished. It's exactly how it is. I don't know. It's just that's how it is.
The show literally starts, and you're like, "Yeah, that was me and my buddy playing games, stoned."
Yeah.
Okay.
and I mean,
probably just the one that I had on repeat too.
And you know what, dude, it is so quotable. Like,
right.
That's another piece, dude. I mean, so quotable, and it's kind of like a universal language too. Like when you're hiking and like somebody walks by and you smell weed and you're like, "What's up? What's up?" Like you make that eye contact. Well, you could say a Grandma's Boy quote, and 9 out of 10 times someone's gonna get it. You just happen to be that one odd out because you're weird.
And they're quotable because they're things that you get constantly reminded of when you're high. Like when I know not to grab anything when it's hot because of Grandma's Boy when I'm stoned. Like I don't know if you've seen Derek. Have you seen Grandma's Boy?
No.
Oh man, he eats a bunch of food or whatever and puts it into the oven and touches it with his hands because he's stoned. Right? Everybody's done that before because it's too hot, and so it's memorable because it applies to a lot of the times that when you are consuming.
Okay.
So
what's yours?
Well, so mine, it's a close toss up between Cheech and Chong, Up in Smoke, and Pineapple Express. But I'm gonna go with Pineapple Express specifically because that was the first time I had ever seen cannabis portrayed. Like I had never seen anybody smoke weed. I didn't even know what weed looked like. I just happened to be homesick one day with my brother, and we started watching it, and I was like, "What the heck is this?" And there was this moment where my dad walked in, and I'm thinking like, "Oh shit, I'm in trouble." And he starts watching, and it's the part where James Franco and Seth Rogen are sitting in the car smoking a joint, and then the cop or the school security guard comes up and she's like, "Your eyes are as red as the devil's dick." And my dad started laughing so hard. And like, this was my Mormon dad. And I'm like, why is he laughing? This is hilarious. And so, that has a special spot in my heart for sure.
Yeah, man.
That's one I've watched on repeat too. Not repeat, but I've seen it many times.
Seth Rogen's so hard for me to watch on repeat. Like, he's so fucking annoying, dude. He's such a smart guy because, man, I've seen him in outside of his acting. He's a smart dude.
Yeah,
but he just plays such an idiot, and it's so hard. It's like watching Napoleon Dynamite in a different way. You're like, God, I feel so dumb.
Totally.
I thought James Franco really portrayed the stoner dealer really well.
Totally.
Really well. Like the way they played that out, like when he goes to buy the weed and then he goes to leave and he's like, "You're not gonna make me smoke this by myself, are you?" Got the weed in the bag. All right, see you later.
Totally. And I'd have to go ahead.
I would have to say that Dante is a much better representation of the regular drug dealer.
Oh my God.
From Grandma's Boy.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
You got to watch it, D, man.
I do. But I have been in Seth Rogen's situation where you're like, fuck, I really don't want to smoke with this guy. But also I don't want to be a dick. So I'll just sit here and be uncomfortable with this drug dealer. Yeah.
Because we're nice people. So, I mean, I think we'd all agree that cannabis, not cannabis, but media has helped normalize cannabis. I mean, like we just said, it has. I mean, Derek just said it himself. I mean, it's becoming more normalized, and really these 2000 years in the movies in the 2000s kind of did it. But again, we're having cannabis cooking shows and documentaries, and I think Weeds. That was a really long running show.
Yeah,
right.
Loved that, dude, and I would definitely say it's helped normalize it quite a bit.
I think, it's also been what it was in the past was that it demonized it. So it's kind of ironic how it's the one that's normalizing it while it's also the one that destroyed.
That's the way.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's the way it's been being normalized is by labeling it with just negativity, I guess.
I mean, I think about watching again that first Pineapple Express, man, and that in my mind that was one of the first experiences I had where I was like, why would anybody not want to smoke weed? That looks so fun. You know what I mean? Like they get high and they start laughing and everything's funny.
What do you do? So should we get away from films like this? I mean,
so the argument I'm making is I think that helped normalize it for a lot of people. I mean, you get a lot of teenagers and young adults who watch that and go, who'd never had an experience with weed and go, what's so bad about getting hungry?
Boy, how many times have you seen one of those videos though while they're doing they change the colors and you're like you're spinning in the air like a psychedelic and then you're like, what the hell? That's not anything like cannabis. Like, what is this, right?
Have you seen Due Date?
Yeah.
I think a Due Date, right? Where Robert Downey Jr. wakes up and Zach Galifianakis is hotboxing in the car and he turns into a bear. And it's just like, what the hell is that?
What is in that joint? Because it's not cannabis.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is pretty funny. Well,
yeah, I think it's important that they keep doing it. I mean, that's the thing about this, right? You don't want to get too political on this, but media controls everything. Mm-hmm. Everything, because everybody consumes media. Most people do. And so wherever the media is portraying at that point in time is what the overall society is going to see and then form their own opinion on.
Right. I think that, it's just interesting that we're seeing this shift where a lot of the media now is portraying cannabis in a positive light rather than a negative. You think about Reefer Madness to some of the stuff we're seeing on TV today, and it's like, is that the same country?
Definitely. Guys, let's get to the questions. We have a Q&A session to take.
Let's do it.
All right. Joe Danny, former long-term toker who suffered cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, gone to the hospital several times through the years, only recently diagnosed. The only cure is to completely abstain. I feel it was due to high accumulation of THC in the system over the long term. What do you know about this?
So this was a gentleman that reached out through our website specifically. I think this is a problem that we're starting to see more and more in the community. The
Real
issue,
quick,
go ahead.
Touch on what CHS is though.
So CHS, cannabinoid hyperemesis or emesis syndrome. This is where they're seeing people who've consumed very high concentrations of THC for long periods of time, and they get to a place where anytime they consume cannabis, they become violently sick. So they typically have excruciating stomach pain and throw up uncontrollably, and the only things that help them are abstaining, hot showers, and capsaicin.
It's been compared to morning sickness.
Yeah, like on steroids.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's incredibly uncomfortable. And so a lot of these people are left with a decision to just quit using cannabis altogether. Now, what's interesting is this is, again, like a super new phenomenon. This is not something that we were seeing 10 years ago. And there's still no agreed upon scientific consensus of what it is, what causes it. There's a bunch of theories, but there's been no studies that have conclusively said it is because of X, Y, or Z. So some of the theories out there are cannabis contamination. So these people are being exposed to some irritant or some pollutant that made its way into the cannabis plant that's causing this reaction. And then the other theory is specifically, there's too much THC in the system and it's causing like this opposite effect of what cannabis should do. I think that seems like the most logical conclusion. But again, I mean, there's research on both sides to point to neither one of those theories is correct. But at the end of the day, it is always somebody who's consuming cannabis at abnormally high levels. And so in my mind, the answer is, like we talk about in terms of tolerance, is take a month off and then slowly introduce cannabis. Make sure you're exercising, make sure you're using CBD and eating a balanced diet and sleeping right. And basically just making sure that all your systems are in alignment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, most definitely.
Have you guys ever experienced anything like that where like you smoke so much that you
Oh
just
yeah. So when I was like in the earlier days, like when I was using concentrates, I don't often, other than cartridges really right now. When I was like dabbing and stuff, yeah, it's because the concentration of it was just too high. The way I think of it, the way I think about it is like taking a dab's like smoking a blunt in like 2 seconds. It's
Right.
just it was a lot to take in, and so like I was I mean, I was pretty young, guys. I was like 20s, but I was waking up and I was like real like kind of sick to my stomach,
Yeah.
and I like would kind of like it's kind of weird. And yeah, sure enough, man, just sometimes a hot shower would help. But I mean, I quickly kind of realized what it was. I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely from this.
It's
And
a common experience for people who use concentrates.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like a withdrawal symptom.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah, great.
yeah, that's the theory, is that you're overactivating these or suppressing these TRPV1 receptors, which have to do with regulating, your intestinal system, and heat actually reactivates them, which is why capsaicin and a hot shower tend to work. So it's pretty interesting.
I did not know that. That's cool. Well, Rose 1995. What up, Rose? What are the best types of strains that deal with diabetic neuropathy?
So again, another solid question. I think this goes back to the whole strain debate, but I don't think there's like specific strains, that we're going to like point to and say this is the strain. It's basically a breakdown between terpenes and cannabinoids. And when we're
Yeah.
talking about neuropathy, which is nerve pain, THC is the king. Like, it really is. THC interferes with the pain signal being relayed from the nerve back to the brain. So, having something that's high in THC is obviously going to be a good bet. Outside of that, though, I mean, you want to look for things high in beta carotene, which activates CB2 receptors, which CB2 receptors are found in the peripheral nervous system, which are all the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. And it also helps reduce inflammation. So, a couple strains that I know right off the top of my head would be blue cheese is high in beta carotene. Super sour diesel, that's another one.
I also read I think it was a Leafly article. It talked about some high CBD strains, like Harlequin or Canatonic.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about sativas as well, and how sativas, and again, guys, this is just an article I read in LeafLink, but it was that certain sativas can help improve fasting insulin levels. So there was a direct link between sativas and insulin levels, and it probably goes in line with what you're saying, Derek. It's more along the lines of the terpenes in those strains.
Thomas, you look like you got something to say.
I just don't know. I look. I'm not confused or anything, but I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what that is, because it seems like to have that kind of an influence on your blood glucose, it would have to be something that connects internally really well and probably over a good amount of time too. I don't know.
Yeah, I just looked this up recently, but cannabis, there's been a mountain of evidence that shows cannabis absolutely impacts blood sugar and insulin levels favorably, which is interesting. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense, because you think about cannabis and you associate it with the munchies. So it's like, how the heck is that favorable on blood glucose and insulin? Which is a little bit on the outside of diabetic neuropathy, but addresses diabetes in general.
That's the actions there after consuming cannabis.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Using cannabis, though, favorably, as you're saying.
And when you say favorably, though, it means, it kind of maintains your blood sugar at the same, around the right ranges. That's what we're kind of looking for.
Right, because you're trying to avoid those spikes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, guys, this has been a pretty cool show. I hope the audience enjoyed. Kind of give a little insight into stoner movies we like. Hey, I firmly believe a man's playlist and some of their favorite movies can say a lot about who they are. Just not a man, but a person. You can go watch Grandma's Boy. You'll see.
I believe it.
Well, hey guys, if you love these podcasts and you've been enjoying them, please, we appreciate all the questions that you've been asking. We've been getting an increase of them, and again, they're really good. Keep them coming. Please leave a rating and review. You're awesome. Have a great week. Bye. Hey everybody, quick disclaimer. The Know Your Dose podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Let's be real, none of us are doctors. Our content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or public health advice. Please be smart and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Seriously, never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. That would just be insane.